You're listening to Skeptoid. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com, the Environmental Working Group, and the Dirty Dozen. Once a year, news outlets worldwide report the Dirty Dozen, purportedly a list of the 12 types of conventionally grown produce most contaminated with pesticides. It's accompanied by a recommendation that consumers wishing to not be poisoned should instead buy organic versions of these. The list is published each year by the Environmental Working Group, or EWG, and its press release is duly published by virtually every major news outlet, print, TV, radio, and online, with headlines suggesting a catastrophic risk level. EWG has published their Dirty Dozen list every year for over 20 years, to the point that today, every news outlet waits for the annual press release with bated breath, excited to drop what they believe is an awesome health bomb on their audience. Well, let's qualify that, because there is one genre of news publication that does not promote the Dirty Dozen. It's science news. Why not? Surely the science perspective should advocate healthy eating and avoiding dangerous toxins. But as it happens, neither the Dirty Dozen nor its parent EWG have much to do with science. EWG is a political lobbying group for the organic industry, and virtually all of their press releases promote profoundly anti-scientific messages based on their co-founder and president's extreme chemophobia and neo-Luddite ideology. They are anti-vaccine, anti-cell phone, anti-biotech, anti-sunscreen, and climb aboard every pop culture train promoting some gross exaggeration or misrepresentation of anything toxic, and I put air quotes around that. In fact, 79% of real toxicologists surveyed reject EWG's reports. If this attack sounds most un-Skeptoid-like, it's because I think this is too important to beat around the bush. And I'm not going to ask you to take anything I've just said on faith. We're now going to go through point-by-point evidence supporting all these charges. And by the end of this episode, my hope is that you will never again allow your local news to promote the annual Dirty Dozen list unchallenged. Okay, let's begin with the Dirty Dozen list itself. Every year when it's been released, science blogs and magazines have published harsh criticism, with titles like, "Dear EWG, this is why real scientists think poorly of you," from the American Council on Science and Health. "How wrong is the latest Dirty Dozen list?" from Biology Fortified. And "The EWG wants us to be afraid of the food we feed our kids," from Salon.com. Nearly all of the criticism focuses on EWG's flawed methodology, and universally, it mentions their unawareness of dose. The reality is that there are safe levels of everything, even plutonium, as I often point out, of which you have some 20 million atoms in your body right now, just by living on Earth. Similarly, none of the items on the Dirty Dozen list would have any health consequences for anyone at all. Fundamentally, the Dirty Dozen list exists to steer you toward organic alternatives, which EWG openly states. This is completely fallacious because it suggests that organic produce is free of pesticides. Nothing could be further from the truth. There is nothing in organic certification prohibiting the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, only their source. Organic crops require the same chemical applications as conventional crops, and substantially more chemicals than genetically modified crops, as those are naturally resistant to the pests for which organic crops require large applications of pesticides. But you'll never hear this from the EWG. They rely on the mistaken belief many consumers have that organic crops are grown without chemicals. A much better alternative to the Dirty Dozen is the Pesticide Data Program, where the U.S. Department of Agriculture publishes the raw data of real tests of produce. And the data isn't exactly presented in a user-friendly manner, but it's downloadable, and scientists like Steve Savage have done the analysis for you. Bottom line, pesticide detections that are of any level of concern are virtually non-existent. In 99% of samples tested, there are no detections at all. In that remaining 1%, 99% were less than a tenth the EPA's tolerance level, and half were less than 100th the tolerance level. In all, only 0.67% of samples were at or above the tolerance level, and not a single sample was at a level deemed to be harmful. Yet the EWG would have you believe that eating non-organic produce is little safer than playing Russian roulette. Okay, now let's talk about their political lobbying. EWG's tax returns, which are public due to their nonprofit status, tell a pretty clear story of what they do. In 2015, the latest year for which they've made their finances public, as of this writing, they spent just under $700,000 in lobbying. $555,000 of this was expenditures to influence a legislative body. Not only does their board of directors consist of politicians, lobbyists, philanthropists, and attorneys, instead of scientists, it includes at least one vehement anti-science activist, Dr. Mark Hyman, the notorious diet and functional medicine quack. It's also heavy on people from the natural skincare industry, just one of its blatant conflicts of interest. In short, get your food science from food scientists, not from lawyers, lobbyists, and those with skin in the game. Okay, here's their stance on vaccines. For many people, the fact that EWG promotes the non-existent vaccine autism link ends all of their credibility right there, a perspective that's hard to argue with. Their infamous 2004 report, Overloaded: New Science, New Insights About Mercury and Autism in Children, is bashed in numerous science articles. Granted, that's pretty old, and it's increasingly harder to find recent articles cautioning against vaccination on their site. But they certainly haven't bothered to take all the old stuff down, and they still caution against what they call mercury in vaccines. Mercury is a neurotoxin, but EWG appears unable to grasp the basic chemistry involved. As an example, while either pure elemental sodium or chlorine would kill you, when bound into the molecule sodium chloride, they form harmless salt. Similarly, when mercury is bound into ethyl mercury, it is no longer a neurotoxin. To portray it as dangerous, you have to discard Chemistry 101. The dose makes the poison. People are in no danger at all from the quantities of either salt or ethyl mercury that we actually encounter in daily life. Placing a cherry atop EWG's anti-mercury activism is their promotion of an old YouTube video that was debunked right here on Skeptoid all the way back in 2007. The video claims to show clouds of mercury vapor rising from a mercury amalgam dental filling in an extracted tooth, made visible by holding the tooth in front of a phosphorescent screen. 1,000 times the atmospheric mercury limits imposed by the EPA, says the EWG, but not so fast. What's been proven in several analyses of the video is that what you see is simply water vapor. The tooth is wet. Mercury vapor is 6 times heavier than air and would fall directly to the floor if it was present, which it's not. Does we do science, EWG? Okay, cell phones. The first thing that popped up for me on my visit to the EWG website was a dialogue to receive their Guide to Safer Cell Phone Use, a PDF containing all the usual warnings about radiation. Nobody has ever proposed a sound theoretical argument suggesting how cell phones or other commonplace radio signals might be harmful, and no studies have ever found any evidence of anyone ever being harmed in the slightest over many decades of constant exposure to billions of people. Experts are split, says their PDF, which is patently false. No actual experts have ever found any reason we should be concerned with cell phone radiation. Their 2015 Frequently Asked Questions document asserts that carrying a phone in your pocket reduces a man's sperm count, and also claims that only short-term studies find no harm from cell phone use, while longer studies always find harm. None of these are true. Here's their anti-biotech stance. A search on their website for GMO returns countless articles warning the dangers of genetically engineered crops, dangers which have never been discovered to exist, nor plausibly theorized. This is not surprising, given EWG's deep ties to the organic industry. The arguments made in several of these articles I read state that GMO crops designed to be naturally resistant to herbicides used to kill weeds in the field, thus increasing yield with fewer resources, are more likely to be contaminated with herbicides. More likely than what? All commercial-scale crops use herbicides, whether they're GMO, conventional, or organic. They also point to super weeds that have evolved in response to common herbicides, though this problem has nothing to do with GMO crops, as it's always been the case in all farming, and is equally a problem for organic farmers. It's all just baseless fear-mongering, intended to drive you toward buying more expensive produce slapped with the organic marketing label. Finally, their anti-sunscreen perspective. For years, EWG also put out an annual Hall of Shame for sunscreens list. Today they've softened it up by calling it Sunscreen 101. Sunscreen is super important, as skin cancer can be deadly and is common worldwide. The Skin Cancer Foundation says sunscreen reduces your chance of getting it. Yet EWG tells you to use it only as a, quote, last resort. They warn against virtually every common sunscreen, pointing to their active ingredients as being poisonous. And unfortunately, there are parents who avoid putting sunscreen on their children because of such unfounded claims. Lifehacker's article on this was titled, "The Sunscreen Ratings That Scare People Every Year Are BS." Except they didn't say BS. Could there be another conflict of interest here? EWG sells an EWG-verified seal that sunscreen manufacturers can put on their products. And since the media has given their annual fear-mongering tremendous exposure, manufacturers may need to do something like that to stay in business. It costs $500 just to apply for the seal. Non-refundable, of course. So, the next time you see your favorite news outlet reporting the annual Dirty Dozen list, or sunscreen ratings, or anything else from the Environmental Working Group, send them a link to this episode, or to any of the specific articles debunking the EWG claims listed in the references on the online transcript of this episode at Skeptoid.com. There are real problems in this world, and to solve them, we need a realistic understanding of them. Exaggerating or inventing fictional problems makes everything worse, as it contributes to a greater public misunderstanding, and consequently reduces our ability to solve real problems that actually do exist. So, for now, put the Environmental Working Group at the bottom of your list of lobbyist ratings, and join me in hoping they work on getting some of their own toxins out of their own system. It's going to be a busy year for us here at Skeptoid Media, and for me personally, traveling around doing live events and trying to coordinate film production with some local events wherever we're traveling. I would love to meet more of you in person. The easiest way to arrange that is to add your name to the mailing list at sciencefriction.tv, and I'll be posting our travel schedule as we know it, so we can coordinate some skeptical pub nights or what have you. Or just log into your members portal at skeptoid.com/members and check to make sure you're on the mailing list right there on the main page. Anyway, I hope to meet you soon, and remember to always be skeptical. You're listening to Skeptoid, a listener-supported program. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com.